All right, welcome everyone, and welcome to those online joining us today. I'm going to introduce Robertina. In the realm where art, science, technology converge, few creators embody the spirit of it. That was ChatGPT. I'm actually going to really genuinely introduce Robertina, whom I had the pleasure to meet and converse with and have lunch with last few days. And I have to start with saying that Robertina, like many of us, started as looking at different pathways in her life. And she came across a great thing, which is sculpture, as her passion, found her talent in sculpture. And making sculpture became her creative outlet. Living in Slovenia, close to Adriatic Sea, kind of like a little bit of the Adriatic Sea there, but also just close to it. And with her love for science, it gave her the best opportunity to explore the biological, chemical, geopolitical, and cultural realities of the aquatic environment. Her work goes very deeply into the ecosystem and alternative evolution, inviting us to question and contemplate our existence and interconnectedness with the natural world. She uses technology tools to express very complex ideas. And I don't know how she does it, but she does its magic. And you will hear all about it tonight. But you know, most fascinating thing to me about Robertina is the way that she collaborates with scientists, researchers, and technologists to come up with the artwork that she's doing and to exchange ideas. And what happens is throughout that, the ideas that get generated, working with these people from different fields, and the cross-pollination that happens, it informs her artistic creations. And by the way, this is a two-way street because the scientists and researchers also are using her methods, her framework in their research, which is really incredible. She coined two terms. Remember this: aquatocene, noise pollution, and aquaforming, which is basically changing from inside out. And these terms refer to the impact of humans on aquatic environment. She has received numerous awards and nominations, and she's an associate professor at the University of Nova Gorica School of Arts in Slovenia. But just don't take my word only for it. Please, tonight, you can listen, you can observe, you can enjoy and witness her art as she goes through that. So it's my great honor to introduce Robertina. And I'm going to pronounce this right. Šebjanič.
Wow. This is like amazing. Really one of the best pronunciation I heard from my last name. Thank you, Mitra, for this really, really lovely intro. I would like to start my presentation or talk first with acknowledgement for people which they brought me here. Skip Victor, thank you a lot for your passion and numerous emails and ideas and force behind you, you know, and I would say also the curiosity which you have inside of you to bring all these different people together. I would also like to say thank you to Mitra Salomon for lovely intro, and we will have also later on discussion. Radhika Malpani, which is also kind of part of the group which was communicating a lot with me and helping me to understand in which community I'm actually entering here. And Lauren Tomer for amazing walk and talk today also around campus. And to not forget Wende Museum, which is supporting this kind of endeavor, and Stanford team to having me here. So really, thank you. There is always lots of people to work on this, that stuff happens and that is coming together. My presentation today, the idea is to have 30 minutes listening to me, and then I hope to have like the discussion and feedback from the public, from you guys here physically present, but also from the online public, which is also coming, because the idea about this kind of crossing different disciplinary platforms, it should be the discussion. So I think that I hope to hear from your side also, and to get a bit of the insight who I am. Next to me, there is a video rolling. It's kind of a presentation. I try to avoid clicking all the time when I'm talking. So here, there I'm simultaneously synchronized, sometimes not. And sometimes we're just like going through different stories, which you will hear. I will talk today about these coins which have been mentioned. It's about aquaforming in age of aquatocene, I call it. Within my practice, and this is like for the last 10 years, I'm intensively working already on idea of understanding what we are doing and how we are imprinting ourselves into the aquatic worlds, and how I call this like invisible pollutants. It's kind of represented there. Invisible because, you know, most of us experience ocean, sea, rivers as something pleasurable, you know. We go there for vacations to unroll the unnecessary stress from us, but we forget that this is also space which is for other animals which they're living there. And yes, my art is many times produced after being on different excursion, experience different field trips, because for me, that is very important. And here and there today, there will be also sounds appearing. So this was just a moment of disruption, I call it. And I think it's important to get this as a disruption, because this is our sound, which we are living inside of the oceans and seas. The sound in the ocean travels 5 to 7 times wider and longer. And the frame of aquatocene was actually then coined by some scientists also, which was mentioned before by Mitra. So the scientists from Taiwan University, they asked me if they can use my artistic framing of this understanding of aquatic, I would say, emergency for their way. And as I stare many times at the seas, you know, different oceans, different situations, I do different recordings from localities, and I develop from these different compositions. And many times when I do the performances, they're very noisy like you heard it before, because I think this represents really well how industrial we perceive the ocean. You know, ocean is one of the biggest economies. You know, everything what we wear, what we are, and how we are, it's kind of distributed through the ocean. And yeah, one thing with the sound is like most of the creatures, we don't have the ability to cover our ears and go away from it. So that's the problematics which comes with it. And this was kind of my enter into the aquatic representation, I would say. And one of the first creatures that I was like getting to know really well are jellyfish. They're like plankton drifters living in the oceans and seas more than 500 million years already. And when researching that and thinking how I could bring nearer to the public also the understanding of their fragility in one way and persistence on the other way, you know, because, you know, if the species is persistent for 500 million years, it has some ability to survive different changes, because there have been changes happening on many different levels through the many different times. With this project, which you see here, it's called Aurelia 1 plus Hertz. There is coexistence between the jellyfish, which they are living in these tanks inside of the exhibition space, and there is this robotic sculpture, which is just moving, uncanny movements, depending of the, and they're codependent, you know, in the sense of like, depends how the jellyfish are moving. We developed together with my team tracking system, and it's giving them the instructions to the atmosphere of the sound, because there is also sound inside of the space, and to the sculpture. So it gives you a bit of this endless feeling of the machine and animals coexistence. There is no need for human interaction in this artwork, and this was intentionally so, because, you know, lots of interactive art has this, you know, you come, you wave, you do something with it. But here I wanted to have this direct interaction between technology, animal, and how far we could think that this will go also later on. And then in the second part of this artwork, I wanted to, because most people have been super fascinated with creatures to see them live, you know. And there's also lots of questions to me, many times also from publics, you know, how can you even present a living organism inside of the gallery space? And it's a very valid question. I always say, you know, this is one of the rare pieces that I have it with this, because I really want to bring this closeness to us. And then the second part of this artwork is actually me and jellyfish performing together. We have concerts where part of the sound is navigated through them, you know, through this tracking system which we developed with my team, and me playing with them. And all of us together, we are kind of there on the stage. But the performance is actually ending when I'm going down from the stage. But it happens that many times public stays inside for longer, because, you know, the jellyfish are still on the part of the sound which they're navigating. Of course, it was orchestrated from me, but I just want to bring these other stories nearer and to explain this project with one sentence. I like to use poetry for Paul Celan, who was saying there is still songs to sing beyond humankind. And I think it's resonating on so many different levels, because, you know, when we speak about the oceanic sounds, you know, and why I was also playing that sound before, it's like over disruption is also disturbing not just like their environment, but also their communication, their chit-chat, we want to say, because, you know, there is lots of animals which they have their own communication inside of the oceans, because very quickly you don't hear nothing anymore, you know, after 200 meters is already dark. So that's very important. And when working inside of this environment, of course, I came across many different problematics. And one of them, and I think it's very crucial, is talking about it, and it's about the pharmaceuticals, the way how the pharmaceuticals, which we are intaking on daily life, are actually influencing different microorganisms. And this was one of the research, and the videos which you see here, it's just like moment from that. Is like we have been doing experimental presence, and we didn't expect, together with Gino Šutić, who was part of leading this experiment, we didn't expect that the animals will actually be diluted, you know, and that this dilution is actually their death, you know. So it was like continuous death of different microorganisms when we saw that. And instead of the project, we tried to mostly bring this awareness about it, and also because instead of the medicine, I think that the space here is really great to speak about that. Is like there is still lots to be explored and understood how the medical intake of medicine could be better distributed in our bodies. And I think that this could be something, and I hope it will be developing further, because, you know, anyway, we are in the edge where we say that antibiotics are kind of crashing, you know, it's not always you can even use them, that they would be helpful for your body, and almost it's like going other way around lately. So it's something to talk about. And then the second part of the research, which we have been doing last 3 years, at Adriatic Sea was actually understanding all these different household changes, and this research was done actually in Dubrovnik, in Croatia, which is a very beautiful city because of its beauty. It's also a very touristically engaging city where the numbers of people are increasing rapidly in the summertime, and in the autumn it's again very silent. So we have been encouraging and we work together with the city municipality and everybody to think how we could use the cities better in the ways of not be so wasteful in the tourism, different soaps and so on. And I added this especially for you, Mitra, because we spoke yesterday about this digital data visualization. And instead of this work, on one hand, we have these unique blown objects, which they are representing different deformatives of sea urchins larvas. And on the other hand, I wanted to speak about these different changes which are happening in the last 30 years of Adriatic Sea, because from EU Copernicus, which is like amazing webpage where you can get open source data, they have been providing me and my team different information about what was the changes of the salinity, what was the changes of the pH, and so on. And we put this info a bit more artistically, I would say. We wanted to represent it also visually, but not just like as a number, but just also as a vibe, as a feeling that you start to understand. And on exhibition, this data is actually on the TVs, which they are moving a bit. So it feels a bit being at the shore, when the water comes to your feet. This was the hope to achieve. And it works mostly, and it does this interesting combination, which, you have this static of sculptures, and then you have this info which is floating. And it goes on many different levels also to explain how we are perceiving all this overload of information also about what is happening with the things, but also the way how we could change them, hopefully. And I will let you to listen a bit.
And we drift, and we glide, and we drift, is the present, and we glide. Aquaforming is the present, who consider which confuses all their home. Consider the ocean their home. Hear them, hear their story. The memories that basking sharks, flame shells, and other creatures, human and non-human. Every aspect of this vast oceanic system can be viewed as holding memory. From the short term to the long term, individualized and collective. The ocean of today is filled with life.
So this was just a moment. The composition is actually 30 minutes long, and it goes in the constant loop, so audience can just enter the space always whenever, because it gives you always the idea of the song, which is in this kind of continuous loop, the same like circulation of the oceans and so on. The creatures which they have been mentioning inside, and their main protagonists are actually the flame shell, which actually in life they're 0.5 millimeter big, and the basking shark, which is huge animal. But I would like to show them in this different disproportion, because what they do and why they're important in specific areas is also for me interesting. And just to say that basking shark is really, but for me it was very inspiring. They have been using that animal as an industrial animal for many years. You know, they have been using their liver for oil lamps in Ireland back in the days. And now, because of the extinction levels, they have been going high up, they started to use them more as observation animals. And there's lots of this, you know, you can go to the oceans, you can see them. And that's why instead of the song, it's also mentioning of them. And then to speak about this kind of animal as a cultural emblem, I was using this contextualization of that a lot instead of this work, which is shown now. It's Ligoliphilia. And this work was actually done in between two continents, between the research which I did in Mexico City especially, with the, instead of the Xochimilco lakes, where there is still some axolotls living, and the caves of Slovenia, where we have orm, which both of them, they managed to develop, both creatures, they have the same evolutionary path, even though that they have been so in such two different places. And both of them, they have amazing abilities to regenerate. Axolotls are actually creatures which they use a lot in this regeneration medicine processes. I'm pretty sure there's some of them here in some laboratory for sure. And for me, it was just interesting to see this difference between creatures dying out, the species totally dying out in the nature, but they are, everybody knows them, you know, like in Mexico, if you say that you work with axolotl, everybody is aware of it. They know how they look like, even though nobody experienced them in the nature. And for me, this is fascinating. And similar was happening with this orm, with the proteus, with this amphibious in Slovenia, you know, we all have this as our Slovenian symbol, but you don't encounter it. So it's this kind of, what is this animal, which starts to be just emblem. And that's why I show them in the form where they have been mostly through the drawings, which I found different scientific drawings, or axolotl was also used as a god, and it was very important in different cultural levels. And just to explain this shadowing of them, you know, and here you can see how their limbs are regrowing, and they have been doing also lots of experiments, especially in the 1960s and so on, where they have been just cutting them into half and growing them into different monstrosities. And working on that, it was quite, I had so many stories to say with that project that I decided to show it as a cabinet curiosity. Because, you know, as you hear with some stories, I'm really precise, you know, with noise pollution, that's it. I don't go further out of that with that project, but here with the Ligophilia, it was just like this and that and this and that and this and that. And then with the curator, Annick Bourreau, which was helping me from France to put this story into something. And she was like, what about cabinet curiosité? You can use this as a possibility to show this multi-leveled situation. And I was using that for representing this also. That's why I enjoyed yesterday in the museum, which I was visiting here, one of these cabinets, and I was like super amazed because it's a passion which you have. And then, you know, because just to say to have this kind of lakes, rivers, and exploring also these different watery entities was for me intriguing to see how we don't actually imagine how we could even hear them, you know, because maybe when we are next to the rivers, we hear some birds. We do understand that there is some flow happening. And with this project, I was playing a lot. I went into understanding how we could use AI for interspecies translations. So especially the sound piece of work Kosonic, which I speak about river Ljubljana in Slovenia, which it has 7 names just because it appears and disappears, appears and disappears. And it's the same body of water, just as humans, we decided it's different because we don't perceive it when it was perceiving, going down and up. And what I was developing together with my team was to read different stories, but then just translate them with deep fake into the sound of the river, sound of the fish, sound of something. So it went a bit contra, you know, it's not, so, and it was kind of interesting to see how uncanny it starts to feel when you start to really listen to it, and it gives you some story without the words, you know, and it's a, I think, also interesting contrast to some works which I did with the poet, with the singing before, the one which you heard with singing of these Irish folk songs. And here I didn't want to do this folk thing anymore because I was thinking, let's go to understand what the creatures do. And this is the orm in the nature, you know, the one which is also in the previous project, because, you know, with some creatures, you know, after some while, you start to develop some relationships and you just tag them along with another artworks further. And it's also interesting to see how we can interpret them from different perspectives, I would say. And this work was actually commissioned with the place which you can see there behind the bridge. It's Cukrarna Gallery, which they opened just recently, renovated, beautiful new space. And they invited me to do a small concert about the river, but then Corona hit the world and I was isolated, and me and my colleague Michal Godec, who was helping with videographing, we took lots of time to go to record, because, you know, it's sometimes good to make some lemonade when it's drama around yourself. So we have been spending lots of time with the river, and the project expanded, you know, and expanded in different levels also. So, and this is the work which I like to show in different ways. This is the work which is able always to change shapes, how to be represented also. Because sometimes we just show it only as audio, sometimes audio and video together. It's one of these which is, I think, helping me to have always this kind of playfulness also with it, to understand how far we could go with it. And then it's also like this, you know, when you're on the field trips, as I mentioned before, for me, that's always very inspiring, you know. I can be in different places, in different boats or spaces, and it gives me then ideas how to think further. And being there, it's for me also important because you meet others, people, mostly, you know. On the big ships, there is many times situations that you're together with different scientists, engineers, explorers. And, you know, when you're like this, you know, when you're next to somewhere, you know, like we watch this fish now and we're just like, they're here and we are here. And then you just start to talk and exchange. And many times through that exchange, the new ideas can pop up, or just like challenging each other. Because, you know, in science, sometimes we believe too strong to the specific truths. And I think that inside of arts, we could challenge that, and we should challenge that. To also see beyond that, you know. So many times when people ask me, so you do science communication? And I'm like, I think it's a bit different how I frame it. It's a different way how I want to represent it, and it's a different way what I want to tell out, you know. I'm just not taking only the information of the scientists, and I don't believe, you know, I think it should be exchanged always. And I think it's very important to have that, I think, possibility and luxury also, that we can think together about something new and explore together. So these are some things which for me are important inside of my work. And I also like to point out this also because I'm also curious what you will think about that. For this talk, I decided to be also vulnerable, which is quite a challenge, I think. And I will represent also 2 new projects which I'm working on now. One of them is like quite heavy topic about military waste. There is lots of it in different oceans and seas all around the world. Maybe it's not the topic that it's kind of many times explored or talked about, but it's very present. And like photos which you saw before, I was on the just rolling around Dubrovnik's beaches and met some divers which they have been pulling out some bombs from First World War, because one boat somewhere there was sinked and the stuff was there. And last year I had the amazing honor to be one of the artists in residence on Tara. Tara is a research vessel which was doing many different research all around the globe, but last year it was open call for Tara Europe, so now they're doing different mapping there in European area, and just because of recent situations of global geopolitical pressures which they started to happen, I had this kind of wish and idea to put out this idea to start to work on this. And it was great because Tara team was also super triggered with that, and they invited me to be there with them on the boat instead of Baltic Sea. Why Baltic? Because Baltic is one of the seas where after the Second World War, all the leftovers from the German army ended up in the oceans and seas there. And during being on Tara, I met like Jacek Beniowski and his team in Sopot University. And they have been so generously providing me with lots of information also, because they're doing lots of research on that together with different entities. So for me, being on Tara and just like being in that area around that, it was already inspiring. And yes. So what we hear here is just like sound above the bombs, you know, where they are stationed. Just to give you a bit of perspective what we are listening to. And having this platform from Tarabot was also great for me, because through that I could fundraise, and I got funding through two companies in Croatia, NGOs in Croatia, Drugo More and Oaza, and with them we are now in the development phase of that project. And to present another passion which I have, and this is like, as you saw, with different amphibians and lizards and so on. So I was like 1 year ago at the Galapagos Islands, and I came across also these beautiful creatures, which they are marine iguanas. When I was when you're diving or you're snorkeling there, and they're just like floating next to you, and it's just, you don't expect lizards to do that so agile. So being there and thinking how amazing they are, but then I came also across some very interesting facts, and this is that during El Nino, they have been researching that they have been shrinking. And it was so weird because, how can they just shrink, what is happening? So the conceptual frame of that is actually that they're able to shrink their bones. So they're able to change their size depending of the kind of critical environmental situation which is around them. And this is something for me which is my trigger, because on one hand, yes, they're able to do that, plus they're also releasing this into their environment. And I really like to speak about this also, how geology is kind of shaping biology, in the sense of like, why do we have specific size or height or presence or different animals? And with them, I would like to continue that story. So with Co-Artist Foundation, which they brought me to Galapagos Islands, we are now just in the process of developing the frame and developing the project. But for now, this is my 30 minutes, which I promise I will not go over. And I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that there will be some questions coming out. That's my email, webpage. Feel free to contact always. And I'm not going nowhere. We are just sitting with Mitra together here, and I hope that there will be a discussion going further on. Thank you.
So we're going to take questions. There's also questions online that Lauren is going to let us know as they start.
I'm happy to ask if there are any more. Do you have questions from people online?
Not yet.
Okay. Thank you. I'm struck by the contrast between your work is so beautiful, yet you are presenting something that is really the result of humans destroying something that is really quite beautiful. And so when I look at your art and I see how beautiful it is, I don't really necessarily connect that with the damage that's being done and how to think about that, really. So I was wondering what your intention is to communicate the message, because your art is just stunning, and it doesn't, even the pictures of the shells in their own particular way don't represent the damage. So how do you think about communicating the message that you want to, which is that, you know, in addition to what humans are doing sort of on the surface, we are also doing something potentially permanently damaging this this environment. And so that's one. I could go on.
We can go with one and then we can continue. I think it's a great question, and it's a question which I also rethink many times, how to navigate that. And to say it like shortly, when people sometimes, when they come to my concerts, for instance, you know, and if they don't read carefully enough, you know, what they will hear, they do expect that they will come to listen to, I don't know, a bit of Whale, a bit of that, a bit of Waves. But then there is this moment of that, because, you know, I like to prepare the public also and let us also to relax. But then I like to make us also a bit nervous. So then in one moment, the concerts, they just start to be noise concerts. And many times they're like, oh my God, like I'm struck, you know, I was like really getting nervous inside. And I was like, that's perfect. You know, if you get nervous, that comes to you. And then on the other hand, you know, when you have installations, when you're next to it and you're like observing all these kind of creatures instead of the glass blown. And I like to layer story with different materialities also. Like I like to use glass as a material which kind of speaks about this fragility, but also transparency of the creature. Because, you know, we observe it, we think it's very beautiful, but we can see through it also. And this is exactly, I think, as a metaphor, you know, how we are looking but not seeing the situations which we are doing towards the damaging the planet, to say it the least, you know. And then on the other hand, what I think, and I would also like to hear your opinions about that, is like in ecology, there is, you know, very quickly we can start to be preaching, and I don't feel myself to be the one who should be doing that, because I'm also part of the same society. I can't change things only by myself, but I try to push this change with more community-oriented situations. So many times I actually do workshops with, so I go together with people out, we go to listen with hydrophones. And one thing is when you hear it here, Another thing is when you actually experience it, you know, we drive out with the boat and we drop the mics, the hydrophones into the water, and then you get this aha moment. And that aha moment, I hope it helps all of us to understand that, yes, in the communal kind of pushes and pushes, which they should be always, you know, it's very geopolitical, of course. We can't avoid that, you know. Also, we will all recycle everything around us. We will never do the change if this change will not come to some specific situations which they're very much connected with economy and our surviving, you know. As I was mentioning before, almost everything what we were consume on different ways or use, it was in one moment as something on one of these boats. And there is plenty of them. I don't know if you have been following when the Suez Canal was stuck, that boat which stuck there, and it started to be panic all around, you know, there is no flow of the goods anymore. And this is something which in this kind of global world, we have to embrace that maybe we don't need to move so many things again around, but it takes a time to make this change. Of course, it's connected with so many jobs on the end of the day and surviving. So it's, I think there is not only one solution, one way how to enter into the solutions, but I think it's a different way. So, okay, I went far from the aesthetic of my artwork, but this is the thought which is behind it, you know. So I think that, you know, with my visual aesthetic representation, I try to speak also this complexity. And, you know, when you're inside of the artwork, there is something moving, or, you know, there is some entities which they are more present, and maybe that is also helping you to connect from different way. So,
Go ahead. Yeah.
Before I came to the talk, my knowledge of pollution in oceans was very limited to plastics. And when I was thinking in my mind what your work would be like, I visualized plastics, but I didn't see anything. And now microplastics have entered the food chain, and it's really worrying. So what are your thoughts on plastic? Have you worked
I
on
work on
this
that,
field?
like I developed workshops on that, you know, so how to understand what microplastics even is, you know, because, you know, different plastics are different densities, they can float or they can sink and so on different levels. So together with Gino Šutić, with this colleague from Dubrovnik, which I mentioned before, we develop, and with some other colleagues, we develop body of work on that. Like I mentioned this in different contexts when I have talks and so on. In my work, I try to push even further in the sense of like bringing the pharmaceutical pollutants or chemical pollutants, which they are even not talked about, you know, because it's something which it's present, but it's kind of not looked at it directly, you know, and I think it should be also understood. But all this is interconnected, you know, like plastics, I think we are beyond the point of turning back, sadly, because if something in these micro levels comes into our bodies and our blood streams, it's also in the bodies and blood streams of everybody else, you know, all these other entities, you know, which they're all around us. And but that's the sad thing, I think, by us humans, is that, you know, we start to worry about things when it comes to us and not when it enters some other organisms. So this is something which I try to bring out with my work also.
Thank you so much for the beautiful talk. Not only have the beautiful art, also make us think about sustainability. And my question really is about, you briefly mentioned about using AI for interspecies interpretation. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about it. Also, your thoughts about, you know, this technology intersecting with the art. And I'd love to have you elaborating on that.
Yeah, this is, thanks. It's a good question. It's also something which I'm having my own struggles with it. And with Mitra, we spoke also, and I think I would also intrigue you to enter the conversation because, yeah, like with all the amount of information which we could have about the sound of some species, and I was just reading recently some articles that they started to talk with whales, you know, I think that that's something which makes me hopeful about the usage of technology in the way that we can enter, and I call this empathic strategies, you know, because immediately when we will be able to communicate with something, we will be feeling much more connected with it. And if this is the trick that will bring us, that we will be more caring for it, for the environment and the habitats, then we go with that, you know. And I think here I see some possibilities of using that technology in that way. And Mitra, would you add something? Because
But you just covered it. That's so.
No, but we spoke a lot about this usage of AI, you know, because of course it can be reused on different levels as everything what we have, you know. It's like there's always different ways how you can enter things. I would prefer to stay on this optimistic level, you know, to not go into these scenarios of doomsdays and so on.
Yeah. It's good. There's a lot of dooms talk about that. So, okay, Stuart.
I had a question about the craft. So the pictures that were up right after you showed the pharmaceutical, the ibuprofen, when you had us listen to the sound, there were pictures on the top and a rectangle on the bottom, and they were really beautiful. But just wondering, were they designed to be beautiful? Were they depiction of the data that just came together, or were they pictures of the ocean and then you manipulated it to be beautiful? What was going on?
The data, the thing is like this, you know, that we have been always when I'm on the field trips, I use lots of data, you know, visual data and so on to have it as a
Was it
possibility.
random, or is it intentional?
It's intentional, and it's combination, you know. Partly there's this, you know, something with it feels like this. It's actually sea urchin.
It's going sort of in and out and
Yeah. Some of it is sea urchin from really near, like the body of sea urchins when they are moving and when they are breathing.
So it's an actual organism.
Yes, it's actually organisms.
Photographing.
Yes.
It's
And it feels like a AI generated thingy. And I really like to play between these two aesthetics, because I think it's so interesting that we all start to be so used to these different gens and, you know, like different manipulations, that, you know, when you see something organic, it's more that than this. So it's combo of that, and partly the things have been interpolated, and because, you know, how to speak about these changes of 30 years of pH or so on. So I try to have it as a visual interpretation, and then when this is floating down on the TVs, it gives you a bit of the float of the sea, but at the same time, it's also float of information. So it's kind of like distinction between these two.
Back to what Skip was pointing out, is it more the visual impact that you're looking for, or are you trying to, because it ends up really beautiful, are you, would you rather it be ugly so that it disturbs?
Depends, you know, like as you know, as I was saying before, you know, like when I want to have like ugly presence, you know, it's then it can be with sound, it can be with different triggers also. And
when it ends up just being beautiful.
It's beautiful, but, you know, the beauty or the aesthetics of it, I think it can also help to enter into that. And, you know, enter into something which is unknown. There's always different levels how we can do that. And it can be off-putting, of course, but it can be also welcoming, you know. And for me, I don't know if you noticed this, but with my works, I really try to have this kind of welcoming, embracing, coming to each other, like the fish which was floating, and it's just like, you know, in one moment, you just see that people are really like, oh, it's like, you know, they start to be there with us. And this is a moment which I really enjoy, because, you know, I think that this connection can help all of us to, you know, build up some bigger stories also with other entities, not only between us, you know. This is how I perceive it. I hope it helps to understand this.
Actually, if I may add, there's one thing that I learned, that you are sharing that data also, whatever data that you are collecting, with the researchers and with the scientists that Robertina works with. So that's really, I mean, there's another impact, right? Because they're using it for maybe solving these problems in a different way. And I must also add that the way that I really appreciate the way that you approach your art and making of your art, because it is in a very positive way, and it is raising my awareness, but I'm also not, it's not very, you know, like doomsday kind of a thing, shocking.
It's
so
not
it's you know, it makes it, it's a very interesting approach, I must say. I really appreciate that.
We have
Skip.
2 guests, just so you know, from our remote audience.
Let's do this.
Questions. The first question is, do you record only from the oceans, or do you also record from rivers and lakes? That's the first question.
I record also from rivers and lakes.
And then our second one, it says, it was wonderful to hear you speak about your work, and I appreciate being able to see the video of the installed works. Of course, it would be great to see it in person. Will there be any pieces on exhibit in the Bay Area, or any collections at our local institutions? Thank you for sharing your work with us.
Okay, so now it's like promotion moment. Thank you for that question. Actually, next week I'm going further to UCLA, to Los Angeles, where I will be part in one show which will be set up in September. It's part of PST, this huge event which I think Skip and the team from different situations also happening. And I'm really excited to be part of that, because this year's topic is actually art, science, and collaboration. So I was really excited when Victoria Vesna and Anu, the curators from this show from UCLA, invited me. And I was thinking it's an amazing opportunity to come here, speaking this lovely audience here in Stanford, and then continue to UCLA, to Los Angeles, because actually this is my first California tour. So yeah, that will be in Bay Area, in California, I would say, but also there is in different places. I'm like based in Europe, but my pieces, they're shown in different localities all around the globe. So
Very honored.
Yeah.
You know, this is the first visit to California, and it's on campus here.
That's great, yeah.
I'll just for the audience in general, the Getty, which is, you know, one of the world's foremost museums, is having an exhibition, I think September and October. It will be global in nature. They have hundreds of the most prominent artists around the world, and their theme is art, science, and technology. So for a museum that's possibly as staid or interested only in sort of pictures on a wall, the idea of art, science, technology, this multidisciplined approach to art, I think is very exciting. It's almost always optimistic, whether it's about space, whether it's about the oceans. And to me, the idea of this interdisciplinary approach to art does really compel you to think about things in a new way. So I think it's a very exciting, you know, exhibition, and you know, the kinds of art that is being developed and is of interest today seems to have as much a technological component. There are artists focused on AI. There are obviously a lot of technologies, and people are doing things other in addition to the traditional art forms. So I think art is being expanded in a way that I think really connects with people in a very different way than it used to. My question is, how did you come to connect sound? You're doing marine biology, you're doing chemistry, you're working in oceans, you're, all of the different disciplines have come together in a very unique way. And just the mere idea that sound is having an enormous effect in a way that we don't see and we don't understand is a pretty new idea. I had never, the idea that plastic is destroying oceans, that's understood, and so on. And there's no one villain here in terms of sound per se, and it's unlikely, who would you even talk to about the problem necessarily. I was just curious how you came to this with the passion and the creativity and the skills that are really needed to do, that creates the work that you're doing. Sorry for the long one again. I apologize.
No worries. But it's a good question, and it's also it's multi-layered, as my stories can be sometimes. But because it's interconnected. I was like one of my first residencies that I was actually staying at the sea, doing research within the sea. It was in Izmir in Turkey. And they invited me there to do research about the fish farms. But at the same time, there was like huge blooms of jellyfish there in the bay. And I was just like, that's a problem, and they should not be happening because it was February, it should happen later on in the year. So it was showing us the change. And then we started to do recordings with the hydrophones just to understand the sonic environments of it. And then, because after some while, I started to be invited to different marine institutes to spend time there as an artist in residence. And being somewhere on the residential stay, it can be also very lonely sometimes. It's lovely, but it's also lonely. And it started to be almost like I was calling it my artistic hobby, that I was doing field recording then. Because then you just go around and you explore also the place, and I was motivated to go out of the house to, okay, let's go to listen to that tree, or stuff like that, and it was helping me to just like connect also with the environments around me. So, and this, through this, I started to be more sonically aware, I would say, and and then you start to be much more present with that. And for me, really, like, started to be entry point into understanding how different the aquatic environment is from the air, because we are visual animals, like say humans, we really depend on the visual how we perceive things, and then everything else comes. But if we would be aquatic creatures, the sonic would be our main kind of sensor. And then it's also the pressure, because the sound and the pressure are very connected. And then in the deepness, all this comes together also. And then, we can talk further. Like, there is also one passion I didn't mention today, because I was trying to condense work in the way that would be possible to follow also, and to not go too much into details. But I sometimes work also with the smell. And I mentioned a few times the chemistry, because chemical representation smell is actually chemistry, chemical inside of the waters. And animals do smell in the water, and then they can navigate through that, especially the olm, this cave animal from Slovenia. It's blind. It doesn't need the eyes, because through the evolution is good in this adjusting the body to the environment, but it's very sensitive to smell and sound. But in caves, the sound for them, this is drop of the water, and drop of the water means food, So it goes there, but then through the smell, it can catches the prey, or it can. It's very interesting, And then I developed one piece actually, which is a globe where 4 different smells are moving, and they're not like pleasant smells. They're very smelly, because this. I think here I'm also answering a bit questions from you too about this aesthetics, because it can look beautiful, but then with the smell, with the sound, with all this other representation, it gives you another feeling also, So yeah, goes there. I hope.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
How do you incorporate sculpture, which you were doing before, with what you're doing today, with your art, the art that you're creating?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring it in with this different installational kind of representation, and then also when working with different artisans, it helps me to have this kind of very typical academic artistic background, in the sense of like drawing or sculpturing or modeling. So then I do the creatures, I do it from the clay, and then I bring this to the glass makers so they understand which kind of form I'm aiming to, because when you have 3D drawing or something, yes, it gives you the idea, but it's still not the physical representation. And with artisans, I think it's very important to have the knowledge of their skills also. So this is quite specific then. And also, as we spoke, we both love stainless steel and working with that. And I have experience working with that. And I have also colleagues which they are working with me instead of my projects to build all this stuff, and many times in the workshops then also. And I think it's also important part of the development of the artwork. One thing is the research and the scientists and the scientific data, then it's other thing is my artistic kind of interpretation, but then it's also without all these different colleagues, it will be harder to do that, so it's always interdisciplinary in many different ways, I would say also.
And I actually have another question, and that is, how do you involve do you involve your students at all? Because you're teaching in a university, in the work that you're doing, or maybe in the research of it, or?
Not so much, because when I do teach classes, of course I bring my skill sets and I bring my knowledge, but I always try to open them to all these different pleiades of works which they're possible to be expressed, because I think for me, like when I teach, I try to bring in the concept, in the sense of like we have one class which is called empathic strategy, where I encourage them to find some entity and explain how they would be entering that entity and relationship with it, to be opening that to others also, something like this. Or of course I bring many times hydrophones and we go to listen and we go to research that. And I encourage students also sometimes, especially art students, which they're afraid to enter the scientific labs, but they would like to. I encourage them also to look into the possibilities how to work instead of the citizen science context, in the sense of like you can build your own microscope very easily, If you're curious and you want to experience it, you can do that. And then when you understand that, then you will be easier entering also lab and speaking with scientists, because you will have already some skill set that it will be understood easier, Because I think that many times, I know like my first meeting with scientists, actually she was, instead of the video, Dr. Alenka Malej, she was head of the marine station in Slovenia, and she's still my favorite collaborator, because with years you develop relationships also. But first meeting was horrible. Like we needed translator, because we have been speaking in 2 different languages, and it took me a while to learn how to navigate that. And I see also that, but at the same time, I think also the field is opening up. I think everybody would agree this that the science is opening in the sense of like we all understand, yeah, one thing is to write the papers, but then you have to distribute the knowledge of these papers in the way. One thing is science communication, but other thing could be also that we all understand what is actually happening with our bodies, society, and so on. So it can go in many different levels of our being.
Yeah, which reminds me of the medicine and humanities at Stanford, which is bringing those two together. So that's so true. So true. Okay, Angela.
I came a little late, so I apologize if you talk about this, but how did you pick bodies of water as your theme? I was fascinated by your explanation about other senses that is not visual. By the way, there is a book that was just written about how we approach the world with different senses. I can tell you more, but I'm interested in how you are so fascinated by the ocean, and then you said also lakes and rivers.
I would say that I'm always curious how something which is harder to enter looks like, because like to stay inside of the oceans longer than 3 minutes, it's only for very skilled and trained people to stay longer inside, or we have to have technology that we can enter that. And this is something which is for me always intriguing, the places like caves, like honestly, I'm not so comfortable in super dark areas, but for the project, I do it, and it helps me to understand also. And then I'm just like, it brings me some fascination that I just feel that there is so many different levels of stories to say of these entities that I just can't just end them. It's not that I would just be like, no, I'm just like water, and then I will be just the air. But I think it's also all the entities which I'm encountering inside of the water are having so many fascination for me that I just can't leave it somehow, because yeah, it started a decade ago and it just continues, and yeah, it feels that it will go on for some while. I did a project actually with the sound of the water and sound of the air above the water, but when I was composing it, I saw that I was much more watery inside of that than airy, I would say. But it's a field which gives me a lot also back, and it teaches me also a lot. So here comes the curiosity.
If there are no more questions, oh,
Are there any specific places that you prefer to record? That's the first one.
Okay, I will say that Galapagos was very special because, mostly with hydrophones, when you put them into water, you hear boats and, some human activities somewhere, because sound travels 5 to 7 times wider and longer. So it means you're in the middle of the ocean, you don't see nothing, and you hear the boat. You're just like, where is it coming from? And it's really interesting experiencing that. And
and then the second question, it says, thank you. There is something so remarkable about the tension between the world above and below the water. I appreciate greatly the sounds and the visuals. Any thoughts or ideas about incorporating or expressing the tactile aspects of water, currents, the sun, cold, and heat?
Oh, it's a question. I was just understanding more it as a remark, which was very beautiful, no? It starts as a poetry.
It's like any ideas, like more of the tactile qualities of it. Do you ever think about that in your work in terms of
the heat,
material
temperature.
Yeah. I do, but it's also like it comes sometimes out in different ways, in sense of like how to even understand that like somebody who is in the sense of the body of the creature, you know, like as I mentioned before, this project of Galapagos, which I'm very eager now because it's something new in the making. For me, this kind of combination about iguanas when they are like, you just see them, you know, they're somewhere there at the lava and they're black as the stones which they're sitting on. And it's this kind of combination between the animal and environment already. And you're a bit not sure whether you see the iguana is the lava or what it is. And then understanding they are heating up their bodies and they're waiting to be warm enough that they can go to swim because, you know, they are cold-blooded animals. So very quickly the heat is torn down because of the liquidity and its temporalities of that. And then, you know, they just swim up, you know, so it's like, it's something which intrigues me. I know that maybe the question thinks more about this, you know, evaporation of the water and how this is also working. And yeah, it's especially we all remember last week it was atmospheric river coming here in California, and I did read a lot about it because I was a bit thinking maybe is it even a moment to come or not, because, you know, it's like entering into area which is in the natural catastrophe is not exactly exciting, I would say. And then also this concept of atmospheric river is exactly that, you know, all this evaporation of water coming up and is also coming somewhere down. So yes, this is one of these kind of physicalities which is really present, you know, and it's today's situation that we all encounter. And yeah, if we think about that, I don't know if the person who asked it needs some more explanation of that, but I think like that.
That was great,
Yeah.
great answer. Okay, Radhika.
I was just going to add, you were talking about the marine iguanas and how their bones shrink with the difference in temperature. There's a lot of cool stuff being done in the Galapagos. There's a wonderful book which you might have read. It's called The Beak of the Finch. There's a lot of amazing work there. Maybe you want to talk to the scientists in Daphne Major or Daphne Minor, because they're doing some really interesting work.
I'm curious to get knowledge and go enter more in that, because, you know, as I mentioned, these two last works which I spoke about, you know, about the military waste, which is like decaying in the oceans, and also about this iguana project, you know, both of them, they're just in making. So I'm putting them out there because, exactly, you know, because we spoke with Skip on the beginning when you invited me to speak here. This was the idea, not just talk about what I did, but also what I plan to do, to see if there would be maybe some idea resonating with some people from here or department or somebody knowing some interesting link to how to connect further. So yeah.
Thank you for being vulnerable and being able to share with us something that you don't usually do, which is your future work and, you know, what your thoughts are in the future projects. And I think they're amazing, especially the iguana thing. I mean, like, I didn't know. It's like incredible. You know, like I can see that being used so much in future science and scientific discoveries. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure to have you here. And I have to point out that Robertina has the coolest shoes. They glow in the dark and they look fantastic. So just like her science and just like her art, it's glowing. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.